All right, so in this lecture here, we're going to title this as Unit 3, Lecture 2. And here is basically we're going to learn how skeletal muscle movement is voluntary. So I'll write that next to it. How skeletal muscle movement is voluntary. In other words, we're going to talk about how the brain communicates with your muscle to tell it to move. And so what we're going to focus in on is what's called a neuromuscular junction. And so we're going to start off by talking about like a zoomed out version of a neuromuscular junction, and then we'll zoom in a little bit further. So I'm going to start by writing the letter A. And letter A is going to be pointing on our diagram that we're about to draw to a motor unit. What a motor unit is made up of is two things, a motor neuron and the muscle fibers it connects to. So today we looked at a single muscle fiber, and so we're going to be zooming in onto a bunch of muscle fibers like this. Okay, so a motor unit has a motor neuron, and if you can remember we'll talk about this first. What does the word motor mean? So we know motors from cars, and what a motor does is it takes some type of energy and it turns it into mechanical energy. For example, a car has a motor, and it converts gas into mechanical energy, or it can use that gas to then move. And so what's going on in our body in terms of motors is we have a body's neuron, which can convert electrical or chemical signals from the brain into mechanical energy. Or in our case, into energy to move the muscle. Okay, so when we hear this word motor, we'll get more into this in the nervous system, but motor usually means coming from the brain, going to a body part, so going to our muscles. And so if you can remember back from Unit 1, Lecture 3, we talked about the different types of tissue. And we've talked about how skeletal muscles have connective tissue, they have muscle tissue, and the last part was nervous tissue. So here's where that comes in. Up here we use this word neuron. If you can remember, neurons are the cells of nervous tissue. And so they have this dendrite piece to them, where they receive a signal, and then they send that signal down this piece called the myelin sheath, all the way to the axon. And the axon has just a bunch of antennae-like branches. And so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on this axon terminal, because the axon is the distal tip of the neuron, which is going to connect to the muscle fibers of a muscle. And so we're going to start by drawing this sausage-like portion to show that's the myelin sheath that's of one tiny, tiny, tiny little motor or neuron cell. And at the very end, we have these branches, the axon. And so I'm going to draw 4 little projections or antennae coming out of this. And I'm going to label this piece with the letter B, because this letter B is going to be our motor neuron. So go back up here and write the letter B up there. That is our motor neuron. Now this whole thing is the motor neuron, or the end of this neuron. However, we're going to be doing some drawing down here, so I don't want to label it there. So down here we have to have our other part C, the muscle fibers. So we're going to draw some muscle fibers or muscle cells. And so we are going to draw some lines across. Remember, these skeletal muscle fibers or cells are very long. And they have a couple characteristics that we will add in. So I'll label one of these letters C. Each of these are muscle fibers. So in this picture, we have 4 muscle fibers. And so in our skeletal muscle fibers, we need to add, first of all, lots and lots of nuclei because they are multinucleate. And also, we're going to add in striations because that's a key factor that helps us identify a skeletal muscle fiber or a skeletal muscle cell. Now, these striations, if you can remember, are formed by those Z lines from the actin or thin filament. Okay, so this entire thing where we have a motor neuron and the muscle fibers that it connects to is called the motor unit. So I'm going to label this entire image with the letter A. Now what we're going to focus on here is the point at which this communication actually happens. And so the signal is transmitted from the brain down the neuron and to the muscle fibers, but right here, at this point, and we have 4 of these pieces, we're going to zoom in on one. Right here at this point is where the axon actually delivers a signal to the muscle fiber, communicating with it to move. And so this point where we actually have this connection between the axon and the muscle fiber, we call the neuromuscular junction, where they actually meet. So we have our motor unit, which has the entire motor neuron, all the muscle fibers it connects to, but the neuromuscular junction is one little branch of that axon and the one muscle fiber it connects to. So it's a very small piece. Again, a junction is where 2 things meet, so it's really that direct meeting spot of these 2 different types of tissue. So I'm going to label this D. And we'll write that down here. So D is the neuromuscular junction. And it's where, I should zoom out a bit, where the neuron attaches to a muscle. Okay. So right here, where we have our neuron attaching to a muscle fiber. Again, we're relatively zoomed out because we are looking at muscle fibers, individual muscle cells. In our next drawing, which we're going to do below in the second video, we're going to be zooming in on one muscle fiber right here, and we're going to be looking closer at the myofibrils inside of it and this junction and how it connects to them. So we're going to be looking a little bit closer at one of these in our next drawing by zooming in right on this red box right here.